Good morning, Steve Morris here. Today I wanted to talk about I don't know what you call it, a standard practice or a methodology in application or software development. We have what's called a change control committee, and that is people who decide whether changes to the production environment, and actually, in some cases, you can have a change committee for the testing environment as well, but it's really necessary for the production environment. And the production environment is the system that everybody uses and is considered stable. When I was at the CDC from 2006 to 2009, I was working on the Vaccines for Children's program. During that time, I was thinking about government a lot and how specifically the CDC could really benefit from a lot of the methodologies that I'd used and learned in my consulting experience for doing SAP implementations. And one of the things that occurred to me is that our legislature is essentially the change control committee. So in software development or application development, if you wanted to make a change to a tax table or any kind of rules, then number one, it had to go through rigorous testing, and then after it was tested, the change control committee would get together and say, okay, hey, look, we tested this here and it works and nothing broke whenever we did the testing. So we're confident that if we put this new rule into production, then sorry, the card in front of me wasn't going. If we put the new rule into production, then everything was going to be okay. And it took everybody, everybody had to agree that yes, that we're okay. Now, there was, some people have more weight depending upon what business unit it is or whatnot, but typically, there's one person who could overrule everything, and that's the project manager or the program manager. But typically, if the business unit owners or those types of or like people were okay with the change, then things would move forward. So our legislature is pretty much they are that same change control committee. They don't write statute, they don't write these acts, they don't write these resolutions. They have teams of people who do this for them, and then they vote yes or no to allow these changes to move forward. And then the president is that project manager, and they can veto. Now, in the software development world, I can tell you right now, if you had someone say, no, I don't want this change to move forward, and they had some valid reasons, and then everybody voted, if it was a majority vote to decide whether the code moved forward and it broke something, people would get fired. It wouldn't be up to constituents to decide whether that person stayed around or not. They would get fired because you just can't have these things happen. You can't break the system and not be held accountable. But that's the way our government works, is that you can break the system all day long, and as long as your constituents are happy and getting money or whatever, benefits, then people who make those kind of mistakes can stay on the change control committee forever. So that's I guess while I was at the CDC, I started thinking about all this, and I've never really had a great love for lawyers. In a previous video, I talked about how I was an accounting major at one time, and I loved cost accounting. But when I got to tax, I recognized that it was just a bunch of complexity meant to cost extra money. Like, there's no reason to change all these tax codes around every year, except for to make paying taxes expensive. I mean, there's no reason for that. I mean, why would anybody voluntarily sign up for a system where you had to incur a cost, really a tax, in order to pay your taxes? That to me is it's insane, really. But we do it, and I think we do it out of just, that's what we're used to. The generation before us did it, so that's just how it's done. But I think we can and should change this. And this is when I started to realize that systems engineers would be better legislators than lawyers, because we understand code, and that's what statute is. Statute is code. I mean, the government is kind of the operating system, and we have all these greedy ass people writing code that funnels money to certain people. I mean, that's basically what all legislation is these days. I mean, they're not making laws that create order where there is currently chaos. Right now, we've got so many laws that the law of diminishing returns is super active. Meaning that we have so many laws that it's creating chaos where otherwise there would be order. There's a reason that God gave Moses 10 commandments to come down the mountain with. Because if he had sent down Moses with 10,000 or so laws, they give or take a few, or 10 or 70, and then there were about 10 regulations for every law, and then there were 72,000 tablets of tithing code. At the time, I think custom would have made them think about burying Moses up to his neck and stoning him to death. I mean, he would have had to come down with an army of lawyers and accountants as well, just to carry all the tablets. So I guess what I'm getting at is lawyers, because they have a monopoly on our law, and they do. That they've made it basically so that it keeps them in power and keeps them rich. And now they've moved their, it's rent sinking is what it is. So what they've done is they've made it so it cost more to have a legal system, but there's no benefit to that cost other than it just being more expensive. I mean, we could have, in fact, I think we would have better law and order if there weren't so many confusing laws and probably a lot of contradicting laws. But, you know, they're not, lawyers aren't concerned with that. Lawyers are concerned really with, I mean, if you ever read what the ABA, the American Bar Association's mission and goals are, it's to protect themselves and promote themselves. So I started having this thought where, you know, what if we formed a coalition of systems engineers who basically were competitors for the lawyers guild, but instead of trying to make things complex and enrich ourselves, we instead attempted to unravel. And this is where it gets complicated, because basically what our legal system is now, it's a wicked mess, and we can go into that more in detail in another video. But there's a thing about wicked messes is that they're so complex, and there's so many players, and there's so many interests, that fixing the problem becomes really, you can't do it, because you can't fix the problem because it's too complex. It's like a giant ball of knots. You know, can you imagine the world's largest ball of string tied into a bunch of knots? And, you know, there's people making knots in it as you are trying to figure out how to straighten it out. That's what a wicked mess is. So I think that the smarter thing to do is, and this is kind of that movie, I forgot what it was called, but, you know, if you build it, they will come. The thought is that if we were to start over with the Declaration of Independence, the Articles of Confederation, and the Constitution, all the notes that went along with creating those documents, if we were to start again from those and write something brand new, but essentially keep the preamble, and probably reuse a lot of parts that are in those things, but get rid of, like, the 3/5 compromise. I tell you what, it sickens me that they compromised like that. I have, over my life, had several dark-skinned friends, bosses, co-workers, mentors, really good people. And to think, you know, that our ancestors believed or tried to say that they were only 3/5 of a person, you know, that's something that we got to get rid of. You know, other things that we got to get rid of is, like, the 16th Amendment, which basically says that the government can decide how much of us they own, which is the income tax, because, you know, for most of us, our labor is how we stay alive. And the 16th Amendment basically says, hey, we're going, you know, the government gets to decide how much of our labor they want to keep each year or take. You know, at one point there was a 90% income tax. You know, they owned 90% of that person. You only got to keep 10%. Now that's why people cheat. So we got to get rid of things like that. And I think that we systems engineers will do a lot better job. I'm not saying that there's not systems engineers out there who would be terrible legislation writers or legislative writers. There probably is. But there would be teams of other systems engineers who could point out the flaws that any of those bad system engineers put together. I imagine that we could come up with a way to test, things like the Affordable Care Act and whatnot. One of the things that, we've always done in the SAP world is, once you had something up and running, if you wanted to change something major, then what you would do is you would pick a location to have a pilot. So, we have, things that the way they run right now, but we want to change the way that healthcare is done. We want to fundamentally change transform the way that things are done. Well, we pick a place like San Francisco and New York and some of these other large population centers that, really love these ideas, and we make them run with it first and see what happens, see all the damage that it does. And then other locations can say, hey, hold on a second. that was a great idea for you guys, but, we're doing okay. Or, we're not doing okay, but what you've done is worse than we have it right now. We have these methodologies. They work great for these big complex companies. We can do it for government. And system engineers, like myself, like Dr. Shiva Idura, like a lot of the people that he's helping train in systems engineering, I think we could give the lawyers a real good run for their money. And, one of the things that we could be doing is working ourselves out of a job. We can go back and work for private industry. Basically make it so that it's less complex, that it's easy to follow, easy to hand off to another person. So that's one of the other things that I've always had to do in my consulting career is, I help somebody get something up and running, and then, it comes, once we got it running, my job is pretty much done. So it's time for me to move on. Well, I help the next person take over the position that I had. So I'd love some feedback on this, especially from other systems engineers, because the way it's working right now, it's not working. It's broken, and all it's doing is keeping the same people in control, and the same people screwing up, and the same people providing the solutions for their own screw-ups, which, it's just, it ain't working. So I hope you all have a wonderful day. I hope you have gotten something out of this video, and please send me some feedback. I'd love to hear what anyone has to say about this. Have a great day. The end is far.